I mean, why don't we just talk about it really quick? Okay, we're going to talk about its pronouns really quick because people have been asking me about it a lot recently. People have been seeing me on the line, and we had a conversation recently about on the Transatlantic Call-In show about how I use its pronouns, and people see, look at they're right there. I need to redo this. Like, it's like hard to see, but look, it says it's right there. Let's talk about it a little bit, okay? I did make a video about it 2 years ago, but I understand people don't always go back and watch old content, so we're just going to talk about it now. I use its pronouns. One of the main reasons, I guess, is that as I've gone through this like gender journey, you know, when I was a teenager, at first I thought that I was a trans boy, and then I quickly realized that actually I was non-binary. And for a while I was kind of exploring some neo-pronouns, right? I was exploring, what if I use AM pronouns, which is like they, them, but you take off the TH. And I tried that out for a while. I ended up deciding I didn't really like it. And then I started using they, them pronouns because that was like the non-gendered pronoun effectively when I was younger. Like, to be, for your frame of reference, I'm 30. I came out as trans when I was 15. So it's a while ago. Like, before non-binary was the term, back then we would say genderqueer. And like genderqueer, I still identified with genderqueer for a really long time. I don't anymore. But like, I came out before non-binary was the umbrella term for all of these different like identities that aren't strictly I'm a boy or I'm a girl. Okay. So I started to realize after a period of time that the concept of they, them was becoming associated with a particular concept. Like when people say a they, obviously that's grammatically incorrect and everything, but there's this idea of what a non-binary person is, you know, that you, and especially like as a transmasculine non-binary person, there's like a stereotype that has started to be built. Like there is a concept of gender that's being built up around they, them pronouns. There's, like, you know, for transmasculine folks, it's the idea that you're wearing button-up shirts with fun patterns and you have short hair and you speak in a flamboyant way or whatever. Like there is a collection of gendered concepts that are going into it. And personally, I started to feel like, oh, I don't really vibe with that anymore. Like I still use they, them like in my real life outside of work, like outside of the internet, because it's just like, that's what people know to use now for non-binary people. Like I don't really insist that people use its pronouns, but I have come to realize that I am agender. Like I don't have a gender. I have sometimes gendered vibes. I want to look this way. I want to dress this way. But for me, a lot of that is kind of disconnected from gender and it's more like, what do I think looks cute or what do I think looks cool? And so for me, I just think that its pronouns more accurately represent that I feel like my gender is a little bit more freakish than like they, them feels so normal in a way, I guess. I'm not articulating this perfectly because it's in it, like, it's just me expressing like my preference and like the reasons that I could give for that preference. You know, it's like I'm psychoanalyzing myself in the process of having this conversation. So I think its pronouns in particular, I think that there is a certain subset of non-binary xenogender type people who really vibe with like a goth gender expression. And that's me. I don't really put that much effort into my appearance most of the time, but those are my vibes, right? Like if I wanted to take more time learning how to do makeup and getting good at it, I would probably wear dramatic black makeup. Or like, if it weren't for the fact that I live with someone who gets migraines, I would probably paint my nails black more often. And if you follow me on Fansly, I post cute outfits there, like goth outfits. So I guess like the its pronouns thing kind of fit for me in that whole aesthetic. Like that's the thing, is that pronouns are partially about the aesthetic. And like, you know, she, her pronouns are associated with women, and women have a number of different aesthetics associated with them, and the pronouns go with it. there are some like lesbians who still primarily identify as women, but who use he, him pronouns because that's part of their butch aesthetic. Stone butch blues, that's a concept that's 50 years old. Don't come at me if you don't understand like high level conversations in the trans community. So like they're a factor of gender expression is I guess another way of saying it. Rather, if you're upset by the term aesthetic, let's just say that pronouns are part of gender expression, you know, and they have these ideas associated with them. And so for me, its pronouns just are the right vibes for me. Hi, I'm Alexander and this is Mitternacht. You should hit the like button and subscribe and check out the Patreon. And ooh, look at this hoodie I'm wearing. It's merch. Check it out. Links in the description. Thank you. I will use they, them pronouns if people are like, you know, upset about it. I'm like, okay, I don't really care. Like I don't even correct people who use he and she pronouns for me because I don't care. That's the thing is like I have transcended caring about pronouns very much, which is I think part of what leads you to a place where you want to use its pronouns, you know? So I know some people are like, oh, that's dehumanizing, or oh, I have trauma associated with being called its. Like I was beat up once while being called its. And so then they're like, so I don't want to use your pronouns. And I will just say to that there are people who also have hard traumatic associations with he and her pronouns. Like, you know, a young trans girl growing up being told like, you're a boy, you know, you're a he, while being like physically abused, for example. I'm totally positive that's happened before. She might have trauma from that. And then vice versa as well with like a trans man. Like I grew up assigned female. If I had some kind of traumatic association with she, her pronouns, would it be appropriate for me to tell my trans female friends, hey, I am sorry, I can't call you she, her because of my trauma? Can I call you they instead? Or can I exclusively use your name instead? I think most people in the trans community understand that that is disrespectful. If you're like, I'm just going to use your name instead of your pronouns because I don't like them. We've all had a transphobe do that to us. And there's plenty of binary trans people out there who've had coworkers or whatever who say, you know, they'll help you over there. And that's a way of denying them their pronouns. Like it's a way of degendering them to a certain extent, right? So if you have trauma around its pronouns, that does not mean that you get to deny me my mode of address. You know, it like that's a you problem. And I'm sorry that you have that association. But that is your trauma to work through. And it's no different than if I had trauma around she, her pronouns. It would not be appropriate for me to say, oh, your pronouns give me dysphoria. Your pronouns remind me of my trauma. It would be like if I refused to be friends with someone who had my dead name, or if I met someone with my dead name and I was like, I'm sorry, what's your middle name? Can I call you by your middle name instead? Like, girl, that's your trauma. That's yours to deal with. And I did say this in the previous video that I made, and it's not like a primary part of the argument or primary part of the reason for it, but I think a lot of autistic people feel like a vibe with its pronouns, or rather that being treated like you're other, being treated like you don't belong, like non-binary people, xenogenders, like otherkin, therians, whatever, like all of these different types of non-normative identities. I think that a lot of us experience a feeling of fundamental alienation from being considered a person, like being considered an equal person. And the more people treat you like an other, the more people treat you like you can't fit in, or you don't belong, or they don't understand you and they refuse to try to understand you, I think that leads to a situation where you're like, okay, well, I identify as other then. Like, I identify as not like you. If you're going to treat me like I'm not like you, and that's probably not true for everybody, but that's kind of one of the feelings that sort of mixes in for me with regards to its pronouns is I'm autistic, and people assume things about me, and they accuse me of things that I'm not doing, like things that I think require intent. And it's like, okay, I wasn't trying to be whatever. Like the concept of rudeness is one, I guess, easy example to call to. And like at the same time, other people do things to me that I feel are rude. But when I try to call them out on it, they're like, well, that's a you problem. And I'm like, okay, well, which way does it go? You know, if you think I'm being rude, I feel like that's a you problem, but then they make it my problem. Whereas like if neurotypical norms feel rude to me, I'm expected to conform. It's called the double empathy problem. It would be like if someone came to my country and tried to speak to me with their language. Like if a Russian person came to America and they're trying to speak Russian to everybody, everybody's going to be like, no, you need to at least try to speak English. And, you know, obviously if you go somewhere like France as an American speaker, if you try to speak French to them, they'll probably just start speaking English to you. But you should at least try. You know, you shouldn't go to another country with the expectation that other people are going to conform to your language, right? And so that's what it's like being autistic, is you live in a world, it's like being Russian in America, where everybody expects you to speak their language, except that we all are born in here. And like, specifically the double empathy problem is like, I was just relating it to language, but it is just this idea that the way that neurotypical people process and function is like wrong, and the way that neurotypical people process and function is correct. And they do not act like they have to talk to you on your level. Like neurotypical people, allistic people, they basically never try to meet you in the middle, where they're like, okay, well, maybe if I adjusted the way that I communicate, then this would work out better. No, they expect you to conform. Like they expect you fully to behave in the way that they expect you to behave. And that's one of the problems. So being treated, like being fundamentally misunderstood in that way, I think has contributed to my feelings of otherness. And like, instead of being bothered by that, I'm just kind of embracing it. I'm like, I don't really care whether it's, because like, I do think that autistic feelings and trans feelings kind of go in hand a little bit. I don't care about gender norms. I don't even care about binary transgender norms. Like, yes, I'm transmasculine, and yes, I've taken testosterone, and yes, I like having boobs, and I'm going to get whatever surgeries I want, and I don't have to conform to a transmasculine expectation. I don't have to conform to a cis expectation. I'm not going to do that. And the same thing, you know, with like autism and stuff is like, I do try quite a bit to conform, or at least in like a way that creates social lubrication. I'm not going to force myself to make eye contact though. Or if someone thinks I'm being rude, I'm just going to say, no, I was not being rude. If you thought I was being rude, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way. But like, I wasn't being rude, you know? And I'm not going to like apologize and be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'll do it differently next time. Like at a certain point, I do expect people to start assuming good faith about me and my communication, you know? Like if you're like, I think Luxander's being really rude, maybe be like, hey, I don't know that you meant it, but that kind of came across rude. And that's a different conversation than just having a reaction like I was being rude. And then also like, it's like the asking for clarification thing, I think helps a lot. But also maybe for you internally, if you think an autistic person is being rude, maybe take like 5 fucking seconds to think about it and go, I assumed that this autistic person was being rude, even though it is well known that autistic people have problems with tonal modulation. So maybe I should assume that they're not being rude. Like, you know what I mean? Anyway, it's like this fundamental alienation on multiple different fronts. Like being autistic, being non-binary trans, being agender, you know, being gender non-conforming, even within the context of being trans. I'm just like, yeah, I am other and I'm cool with it. I enjoy it. I like being separate. I like being myself. I don't need other people. I mean, I kind of need other people. Everybody needs other people, but I never have these problems when I'm talking to other autistic people. You know, I'll be like talking to an autistic friend and I'll make a clarification because I'm like worried that they're going to think that I was being weird or whatever, or rude. And they're like, oh no, I understood, but thank you for clarifying. I'm like, I never have these communication problems with other autistic people. So yeah, I feel at home with the freaks. I feel at home with the outcasts. I feel comfortable as an outsider. And like all those things, as well as the whole, like, I think they has a gendered understanding now of like, this is what a non-binary person is like. And I'm like, except that I'm not like that. So kind of all these feelings tie in together. And that's why I prefer it's pronouns at this point in my life. Hopefully that has provided some clarification and people can appreciate the conversation from this point. Oh gosh, I will say also, yes, sometimes you start info dumping and people think that you're talking down to them. People think that you're lecturing them. And I hate this. It's one of the most frustrating things. I'm like, I'm just trying to tell you about what I'm thinking about recently. Or I'll tell you about, like, I'm telling you about something I've been processing recently or something I'm interested in right now. And yeah, people perceive it as like, oh, you're lecturing me? I didn't need you to tell me about that. I'm like, wow, I was just talking about something that I was interested in or something that was going on with me. Like, I'm like, that's not my problem. You know, that there are so many layers of subtext that people imagine. And I'm like, no. If I'm being condescending to you, you will know. Like, you won't have to dig through what I'm saying. You won't have to be like, well, it seemed like you used a weird tone. Like, no. In fact, I think I'm being really mean when I'm being like, if you see me on the Transatlantic Call-In Show on The Line, usually it's on Thursdays. I'm not on there every Thursday, but like most Thursdays. There are times when I feel like I'm being really fucking mean to people. And then I go back and rewatch the segment and I'm just being really direct. But like, that's how me being mean is. I'm like, I just like, I talk over people and I'm like, yeah, exactly. I will tell you if I think you're being stupid. Like those times when I'm like, okay, except you have no justified reason for believing that. Or I'm like, you have no evidence, you know, those are the times. And like, I always feel like I'm being more mean than I am. And, you know, it's not a good feeling for people to be like, I think you're being rude and condescending. And then I'm like, oh, did you want to see what rude and condescending looks like so that you can get some perspective? Because if you thought I was being rude and condescending, then you have no fucking idea what those words mean. I am not mean though. Like, I am not the person who is like that most of the time. And like, even when I feel like I'm being kind of mean, I go back and rewatch it and I'm like, oh, I can tell that I'm heated, but like objectively, this is not that mean. Anyway, this has become a little bit more of an autism rant than I meant for it to. But yeah, it's pronouns. They're the coolest. You should use them. We're the cool kids club. Last month was Pride, now it's time for Wrath. Thank you so much to my patrons, including Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Jack, Amanda B, Michelle Winter, Wellington Marcus, Danielle McDonald, DZXN, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Pasnell Infinity, Suzanne Maynard, Sojo, Jamie Jam, Dizzy Quiche, Jericho, Kevin Young, Liam Hodgson, Athiette, Elavie Nobody, Mr. Atheist, Elizabeth Bartell, Celeste, Nova, and Michelle Frattaroli.